My name is Diamond Taylor, and I want to make a disclaimer about this video I'm about to make and say, it could be triggering, but also I want to bring awareness to what I went through and what others may be still going through, and let people know they're not alone. It's May, so it is officially the month of mental health awareness. And I'm just honored that I could sit here and tell you my story. Nervous, but I'm honored. And I'm just, I'm happy to be here to tell this story and just to answer these questions that a couple of y'all sent in. This is very dear to my mind, body, and soul, so I wrote my answers on a Google Doc so I wasn't just rambling and making this video. Please don't mind me as I read. Maybe I'll put it over here. That I'll be saying just so we can stay on track. In this video, I'll talk about what I've gone through, how I dealt with it, my experience with mental health, my journey with cutting, how childhood trauma affects people in their adult lives and relationships, and a few other things y'all sent in. Now, I'm not a licensed therapist. I'm not even a counselor. So all I could do is just tell you from my perspective. I'm not a professional at no point. I'm just me and an honest person who wrote a cool book about what I went through. If my words fail me, I'm a writer, not a speaker, so bear with me. Let us begin. I started knowing the feeling of sadness when I was about 7 or 8, when I would watch my parents constantly argue and fight. My parents were very young when they had me, and they had a very toxic relationship. I would watch them fight all the time and end up going to cry at my grandparents' steps so they could come down the stairs and help me. I felt scared. Seeing my mom cry would make me cry. Seeing my dad cry would make me cry. They would hit on each other, call each other names. Like, my dad would call her a hoe. My dad would come home with scratches on his back. And at the time, I didn't know what the fuck that was. I was just like, why are you mad at him? Just a daddy's girl. When I would run to my grandparents' step, I really wanted to be saved. Like, at that point, all I knew was them fighting, and it got really bad. And I said, like, around 8 or 9, they asked me if I wanted them to be together. And I, took a big girl step, and I said no. Something told me no. And they said, why? And I said, because y'all argue too much. Thinking back, I know I didn't break them up, because they didn't listen to me. They ain't never listened to me before in their life. So I used to blame myself for their breakup. Around 8 or 9, I would start going back and forth from my grandma's house to whoever my dad was staying with, whether it be like his aunts or his dad. I would go over there. And I remember that was like the first time I dragged a hanger through my arm. The only time, but I was like, when you're young, and it's kind of like a baby, like when babies get mad, they throw themselves into a wall, like they throw themselves back and hit their head on the floor. That's kind of like, I could be a little extreme, but that's kind of like, I just saw the hanger and I just dragged it because I was so mad. This nigga left me with my Creole aunties. And to me, that was just traumatizing. It was like masquerade mask all down the hallway. It was big clowns, little clowns, all type of clowns in that house. I didn't want to be in that house. I didn't want to be in that house with them. I was so young. All I ever wanted to do was be underneath my father. And of course, he would leave and he would just drop me off with them. And I remember I was crying and crying. And my dad's like, stop crying. And he just left. And I got so mad. I fucking dragged the hanger through my arm. And it was like a little scar. Now that I'm older, all my scars are just so little and nothing. But I remember when I was like that young, I was so paranoid of losing my dad to the streets, to violence. I was so paranoid of somebody robbing the house. I have no idea how I could be so young and so paranoid. I had no idea how I could be so young and be worried about somebody breaking into my house all the time. Like, that was just my fear. And so when he would leave the house to go be with his friends, I would be like, I would just have the worst thoughts of like my dad dying. And it was just I traumatized myself damn near. When I was in the 3rd grade, they officially broke up. And I moved to Texas for a year with my dad. This was yet another milestone because here's where I started to feel like I was being abandoned by my dad. When we got to Texas, it was cool at first. You know, like we was with his big sister, my Aunt Nikki. I was with my cousins. And then when the school year started, he started disappearing. It was like he was partying every night. And, you know, like I was in the 3rd grade, so I was still scared of the dark. I would come to his door and knock on his door like any child would. I wanted to sleep in the bed with my dad. The door would be locked. Music would be bumping. And in 3rd grade, I didn't know what that meant, but I know it made my blood boil. Like all I knew is that my blood would boil. So I would bang on his door, start screaming. He still wouldn't open it. Every woman he introduced me to, I probably treated worse than he did with his dog ass. So I wanted to move back with my mom, and when I did get back, I found her engaged. As I think about this, I laugh. It's like I'm sort of baffled because after 10 years of being with each other, their coping mechanism of breaking up was just fucking terrible, obviously. For my dad, fucking every race of women, and then introducing them to me when I only knew him to be with my mom, to my mama being with a nigga for 10 years just to go marry some random ass nigga after one. If I could see it how I see it now, back then, I probably wouldn't have done most of the stupid shit I did. I probably wouldn't have been calling out for so much help that they were so blinded by their own bullshit to see. You know, I wouldn't have been asking for so much attention. Anyways, after much complaining and crying about how I hated the nigga, she still chose to marry him. And I think for me, that was like the first red flag. Like, wow, she really choosing this nigga over me. Like, I remember I told her I hated him. And she washed my mouth out with soap. Baffling. Soon I was the one washing their dishes and mopping their floors. The more I revisit, the more I get angry at my dad for not being there. Come to find out, he started doing crack. It didn't faze me at first because I was 12. And what was crack to me? Crack to me at 12 was putting powdered donut around my mouth and laughing about it with my friends because I never thought it would be my dad. And when I did, that was even still my coping mechanism on something. I'm gonna laugh about this shit because what is it? He was so in and out of my life. That year I came back while she was getting married, I didn't know the severity of it. And I remember him telling me, like, picking me up and taking me for a walk and telling me, like, Diamond, I'm addicted to crack. And I started laughing in his face. And he looked at me like he was disgusted, like, what's wrong with you? And I didn't understand. And he said, it's like the devil's on my back. Like, and I just stared at him and left it at that. We went like, that was it. That's all. That's the explanation. A monkey on his back. that he gave me. My mom was getting a divorce because this man embezzled hella money from UPS and went to jail. She ended up becoming a felon because of him. All the fucking signs she ignored from me. For this to happen, I ended up moving with one of my best friends and staying with her for a year. I was in the car with my best friend, and her uncle was driving down Crenshaw, and we passed 48, and I saw a man walking. I just saw a man walking, and like literally it was either a Mexican or it was my dad. I couldn't tell, but I knew in my heart. I said, stop the car. And then my friend's uncle, he was like, what? I'm like the 6th, 7th grade. I'm like, stop the car. He doesn't. He gets to a red light, and I just hop out and I start running. I run down like a block, and I'm like, Dad. And he turned around and he looked embarrassed, and he's just like, I look terrible, huh? And I looked at him, and like, he was dirty. He had 2 bags of cans on him. Like, he was homeless. I said, yeah. He said, I know. And then he said, I love you. I said, I love you too. I got back in the car. And I went to World on Wheels that Sunday. Like, that day I went to World on Wheels. Like, I didn't just find out my dad was homeless, carrying around cans on Crenshaw. It did, like, that shit was normal. That before that, I was already rebelling against my mom because of her choices that she made. And that's when I pretty much began to spiral downhill. By the middle of 7th grade, I ended up moving to Texas to live with my aunt. And at the end of 9th grade, I began my coping mechanism with cutting myself from feeling abandoned. I looked up the word abandoned. It said, cease to support or look after someone to desert. But the ones that spoke to me most was leave empty and give up completely. I don't know. In my head, maybe at 12 and 13, I thought we'd go to Texas for a year or 2. My parents would come get me. They didn't. It was the same shit I heard every year. My mama is doing her thing. My dad is still on the street. Niggas would call my aunt like, hey, I seen Damon. I seen him walking in Lamert with a flat screen TV. And my aunt would be like, oh, he good then. Like, bitch, what? So it was normal. It was just normal to me at that point. My uncle had seen my arm. He took my ass to therapy that week. He didn't give a fuck. And so I got sent to therapy for cutting when I was about 15 or 16. Even after I was in therapy, I was still cutting myself. My attitude was so poor towards everybody, even the people who were trying to help me. I ultimately self-destructed. I felt so abandoned from my parents. I started hating them. The more I started hating them, the more I started hating myself, blaming myself. The more I started hating and blaming myself, I would cut myself. In 2011, my mental status reads, diagnosed with generalized anxiety disorder, still here, PTSD, still here, 2nd degree to child sexual abuse victim, which was a secret I ended up keeping for 8 more years just to eat me alive. It goes on to read, 17-year-old African-American female with consistent symptoms of MDD, major depressive disorder, GAD, generalized anxiety disorder, and suspected PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. Second degree to childhood sexual abuse. Second degree to parental neglect. I dealt with it every way I could. At first, escapism, which resorted to my self-harm and addiction. I even put myself through a very toxic and abusive relationship from 15 to 18 because it was like all I knew. It was normal, like me hitting a nigga hitting me, a nigga cheating me and playing the fuck out of me. It was normal. It was a cycle I saw. When I look back, and forgive me for becoming emotional, but when I look back at my journey, I sometimes have to remind myself that I am a survivor. Other times I could get so caught up in how unbelievable it was that I would harm myself over two people who truly didn't have no concern for me. And if they did give a fuck, they didn't give a fuck enough. But I was so young, and I was so young and sensitive, and I'm still like hypersensitive, and my feelings were just crushed. So here's where I am now, 10 years later. They still don't give a fuck about me. And am I supposed to still be crushed? No. When I take myself back to my inner child and know how she feels, that's what brings me to these tears. But at this point, it has nothing to do with me. It's something personal to them. I had to learn the hard way in life. I didn't have anybody explain this shit to me. Not even a therapist could understand. And if she could understand, her ass can explain it how I can. Like, my therapist couldn't be like, well, you know what, Diamond? Your parents didn't love themselves, and they don't love themselves. They never found themselves. They never instilled the self-love within themselves to be able to love you correctly. It wasn't you. It's not your fault, Diamond. It's damn near not their fault. It's their fault they didn't heal themselves. It's their fault they didn't break the cycle. But them stuck in that cycle has nothing to do with you. I stopped cutting myself when I was 20, right before I got pregnant with my daughter. And when I got pregnant, I said I would never cut myself again. And so now I put my daughter in my shoes. And I just, like, how would I feel as a mother if my daughter ever harmed herself? Literally makes me want to hold my breath. Like, just to even imagine the pain I went through. And my daughter go through the same thing. But that literally gives me all the perspective I need. Like, I've never felt tempted to fall back in the cycle. I've never felt maybe I should go back. Or I've never even really took myself back to the pain my parents took me through. Because we on the better things. We on the new things. I have bigger things to worry about. And it was Mars. I can't imagine, like, even now when Mars, she gets mad, she might hit herself. And that shit takes me to another level. Like, no, we're not doing that. We're not even doing nothing close to that. We're going to use our words. We're going to digest these emotions and these feelings correctly. Because I understand not being understood. I understand being looked at crazy. I understand thinking the attention I needed was too much from my own parents. Whew. So that's that. The next question is, did you experience postpartum after you had Mars? And I didn't really notice, like, well, what was postpartum to somebody who's been depressed since they were 7 or 8? Like, I was just still the same sad person, just this beautiful baby in the picture who gave me a strong sense of motherhood and responsibility, which I always had. I damn near raised myself. I raised myself. I ended up raising my brothers and my cousins when their mom passed away. I had to raise myself, and I did it all types of wrong. Did the most out of it. Thought I was grown, doing shit I had no business doing. That would later eat me up and affect every sense of self-worth I didn't even know I had. Now, I'm going to talk about how childhood trauma affects people in their adult lives and relationships. Childhood trauma will affect you in your adult life and relationships if you don't address and acknowledge what happens. Sometimes we want to know what exactly happened and why it happened to us. We blame ourselves and we become ashamed, leaving us to avoid addressing the deep issues, which basically loops us into feeling trapped in the trauma rather than just addressing it and being able to let go of that pain because we've acknowledged that life happens and mistakes are made. We are not always that blame. Sometimes we take on the blames for others. We leave them with no accountability. And that's just like a cycle of manipulation. And when you don't leave people accountable, they keep doing the same shit over and over again to you. When you fully love yourself, you will then realize how important it is for those to take accountability instead of manipulating you or even manipulating your own self for them. Because how many times have somebody done something to us and we go to them and be like, well, I'm sorry. What we sorry for? Like, we have to find that strength within and hold it down and let them take accountability. Whether that's them taking 20 years to learn how to take accountability, do that shit. Whether that's them saying sorry and we still step back and set boundaries, like, that's what self-love is. Self-love is setting boundaries. Self-love is making a person take accountability because you believe in yourself that much. The next question is, how's your dad so far? Has he been involved with the new baby coming? No. My dad is as far as I left him when I posted that pic of him fresh out of jail. When you're self-aware, you can look in a nigga's eyes. Not even just a nigga, anybody's eyes. You can look in somebody's eyes and you know when they playing you. And that's no different from me looking in my dad's eyes. I don't play around when it comes to toxic shit. Most of my life has been centered around toxic shit. I could read energy, which means I could read bullshit. My father's full of bullshit. He's not involved with my life, and he won't be until he's ready to grow up and be a real man. My father is willing to admit his wrongs, and he's a pretty honest person, but he's not honest with himself.